If you give yourself 2 weeks to do something, it'll take you about 2 weeks. But if you give yourself 2 days to do something, how long do you think that same task would take you? This question lies at the heart of Parkinson's law, a phenomenon first observed by the British naval historian Cyril Parkinson back in 1955 in an article he penned for The Economist. Cyril argued that work expands to fill the time available for task completion. Parkinson wrote that an elderly lady of leisure can spend the entire day in writing and dispatching a postcard to her niece. An hour will be spent in finding the postcard, another in hunting for spectacles, half an hour in search for the address, an hour and a quarter in composition, and 20 minutes in deciding whether or not to take an umbrella when going to the pillar box in the next street. The total effort which would occupy a busy man for 3 minutes, all told, may in this fashion leave another person prostrate after a day of doubt, anxiety, and toil. But how many of us are actually guilty of behaving like the elderly lady in that story? How many of us allocate far too much time to get work done, and as a consequence of that, get no closer to our goals or take 5-10 times longer than we should to actually complete a task? In today's episode, I'm going to explore how we can use Parkinson's law to get more done in less time without compromising the quality of our work. But first, take a moment to like, share, or subscribe if you like this show. The more people that tune in, the more people that subscribe, the more motivated and incentivized I'll be to keep bringing you insights of the highest caliber on a weekly basis. So, how does Parkinson's law help us get more done in less time? 1. Tight deadlines help us get into the flow state. Now, if you are anything like me in school, you might have been given 4 weeks to complete an essay, but you waited until you had just 2 days left and then knuckled down to write the whole thing in 48 hours. This is because consequences were suddenly high and time was tight. Now, tighter deadlines, high consequences, these are essentially triggers that help us get into the flow state, that physiological state of mind where we are completely immersed in a task and the rest of the world seems to just fade away. We could be writing an article and hours could go by and it could feel like minutes. And McKinsey also found that when we are in the flow state, we are up to about 5 times more productive than when we're not. Now, we've all heard of authors who take 3, 4, 5 years to research and write a book. But one such author who writes his books in only several months is Ben Mezrich, author of books that have been optioned and turned into box office hits like The Social Network and 21. Now, when I spoke to Ben on my podcast Future Squared, he told me that he commits to writing 6 pages a day. He'll lock himself in a room and just commit to writing 6 pages. Whether it takes him 2 hours or 10 hours, he'll commit to those 6 pages. And by doing so, he can crank out an entire book in 3 to 4 months. Sometimes even less. Now, this is the power of Parkinson's law. By giving ourselves less time to complete a task, we'll spend more time in flow and in a higher cognitive state. Number 2, more finishing kicks. I also had the pleasure of speaking with Alex Hutchinson on my podcast. Now, he's the author of Endure: Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance. He also used to write for Runner's World and Outside magazine. Now, in this research, they looked at modern records set in the 5,000 and 10,000 meter runs. Now, what they found was, in those races, the fastest pace was always in the first and the last kilometer, in 65 of 66 instances of records being set in the modern era. Now, Alex Hutchinson calls this tendency to speed up when we get to the finishing line the finishing kick. And it's found not only in endurance sports, but also, if you look closely enough, in our own day-to-day work. For example, if we have 12-month targets, when we get to, say, the 11th month or maybe even the 12th month, we're going to hustle much harder to hit those targets. But what if we had 13-week targets or 3-week targets? That way, we're going to incorporate more finishing kicks into our work. This is something I do with my team, where instead of having annual goals, we focus on quarterly goals. And so therefore, we spend about 4 weeks every quarter in that finishing kick headspace, over the course of a year, that gives us about 16 weeks of operating at that optimal cognitive level where we're digging a little bit deeper versus just 4 or so weeks at the end of the year. So by giving yourself less time to do something, you're effectively pushing yourself into that finishing kick headspace. But the question you might have is, if I give myself less time to do things, won't the quality of my work suffer? And the answer is, it depends. If you give yourself too little time to do something, you will ultimately become frustrated and the quality of your work is likely to suffer. But if you give yourself too much time to do something, well, then you're just going to waste time, money, and energy. And this is something that we are all guilty of. Whether it's creating a PowerPoint presentation for a sales proposal and spending a couple of days creating that proposal and then perhaps another 3 days tweaking the formatting, as I was prone to do when I worked in big tier management consulting firms. And so this is something that we want to be wary of. Running past the point of diminishing returns. You know, there's a classic scene in Forrest Gump where he's playing college football. He gets the ball, he doesn't quite know which way to run. His team on the touchline, his coaches are saying, run that way, run that way. So he turns and runs. He's running so fast. He gets to the end zone, he scores a touchdown, and he just keeps on running. He keeps on running, takes out a member of the marching band and runs right on through into the dressing rooms. Now, this is a classic example of working past the point of diminishing returns. Now, at the same time, we want to be wary of not having enough time to make it to the proverbial end zone. And this is where striking a balance between speed and quality becomes key. So how do we do that? This is why we need to have a clear definition of done. Now, a definition of done is a concept that comes out of the world of agile software development. Now, software development teams will effectively use a definition of done to indicate that all of the acceptance criteria has been met. Now, examples of this for a piece of software might be that unit tests have been passed, code has been reviewed, or the product owner has accepted the user story. Or if I'm writing an article, it could be that my own acceptance criteria is that I have written 1,000 words, I got a score of 95 in Grammarly, and one of my colleagues reviewed it and thought the article satisfactory. Now, in your case, defining what your definition of done or what your proverbial end zone is makes all the difference in the world to ensure you stop at the right point. Because high producers know when to stop, whereas most of us keep on running past the proverbial end zone, wasting a lot of time and energy. Now, Parkinson's law is actually something we can use in conjunction with time blocking, a concept that I have previously covered on this show. By combining Parkinson's law with time blocking, we can ensure that we are getting as much as possible out of every single day, week, month, and quarter in a way that's aligned with our objectives. So the next time you find yourself sitting down to a task, ask yourself, what's my definition of done? And how much time do I really need to complete this task? And then work accordingly. Until next time, Workflow is out.